All right, we are live now. Welcome back, Augustonians, and a big hello to anyone joining us for the first time. My name is Jessica Lene, and I'm the curator and host of Lit Friday, a monthly digital program featuring in-depth conversations with artists, activists, writers, and thinkers from the African diaspora, and those who conspire with us in eliminating anti-Blackness. Just a calendar reminder that on May 28th, we are welcoming poets Joshua Aiken, Nicholas Goodley, and Malcolm Tariq for another poetry reading and group conversation about their work. And on June 25th, we are having a double celebration. First, we are celebrating a year of Lit Friday programming. Our inaugural program is curated by Disha Filia and featured poet Yona Harvey and poet, performing, and visual artist and activist Vanessa German. Since then, we have had as many as 6,000 viewers for one Lit Friday and have featured artists and writers such as Damon Young, Bernardine Evaristo, Michaela Wuna, Dr. Fahamo Piku, Nelson George, Ming Smith, Dr. Yaba Blay, Nona Faustine, and many more. A huge hug and thank you to our previous participants and a thank you to those to come. We are also celebrating and having a pre-launch, pre-release book party for poet and activist Ariana Brown for her forthcoming book, We Are Owed, which explores Black relationality in Mexican and Mexican-American spaces. And We Are Owed, as Brown searches for other Black kin in the same spaces through which she moves, her experiences of Blackness are placed in conversation with the histories of formerly enslaved Africans in Texas and Mexico. So remember to join us again on June 25th. And tonight, we welcome poet, essayist, podcaster, and publisher Chiwan Choi in partnership with the Greater Pittsburgh Festival of Books. Today's Lit Friday starts the one-year countdown for the Greater Pittsburgh Festival of Books, which will take place on Saturday, May 14th, in 2022. But lots of activity is already happening in preparation and in celebration. They are partnering with organizations like us to put on literacy-based events, as well as planning a host of pop-ups of their own. Planning is underway now for their next event, an evening with John Edgar Wideman, the Homewood-born novelist and essayist. Also, the Greater Pittsburgh Festival of Books partnered with Reading is Fundamental and Google Pittsburgh to distribute over 1,000 children's books this week to kids and families most impacted by the pandemic. Check out the festival website for more info at pittsburghbookfestival.org and stay connected for future partnered events. And now to introduce Chiwan. Chiwan Choi is the author of 3 books of poetry: The Flood from Tía Chucha Press in 2010, Abductions from Writ Large Press in 2012, and The Yellow House from CCM in 2017. He wrote, presented, and destroyed the novel Ghostmaker throughout the course of 2015. His poems and essays have appeared in numerous journals and magazines, including the New York Times Magazine, On the Bus, Esquire.com, and The Nervous Breakdown. Chiwan is a partner at Writ Large Press and a member of the Accomplices. Chiwan was born in Seoul, Korea, spent his early childhood in Asunción, Paraguay, and now splits his time between Pittsburgh and Los Angeles. He is currently working on a new book, My Name is Wolf. Thank you so much for joining me, Chiwan. Thanks for letting me bother you.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to just chat with you, as always.
I'm always excited to chat with you again and again. So you're going to read from The Yellow House for us.
Yeah, I'll read a few pieces and then we'll get to chatting.
Awesome. Thank you.
The Yellow House was actually book 2 of a trilogy I've been working on. So the first was Abductions, and then The Yellow House, and then the third is the current book I'm working on, My Name is Wolf. So I'll just read, it's a book-length poem, so I'll just read a couple of things from like the middle-ish, and then a couple of things from the end of the book. My father walks me to Jesus. He says, listen to what he tells you. And I wet my pants, but do as he says. He teaches me salvation only comes through pain. So I hammer at my bones in my sleep. The abductions then come until my language is lost. My mother tells me in silence, learn to dig the alien soil for sharp fragments of lives long gone, and to carve into the surface of the world the thing inside that they tried to take away. In this new world, she says, it is no longer a heart, it is called a poem, and you are arsenal buried for the ones to come. This is how you breathe. This is how you speak. This is how you break and become unstoppable. This is the same trumpet, the same piano, the same pitch of your voice. This is the same silence hidden in my whisper. This is loneliness. This is how much we don't care. The same curl of your elbow, the same loose hair on my sleeve. This is the same miracle that will kill us. This is the lamp of a night we can't weather. This is saying it out loud. The same confession, the same confusion. This is the guitar, the same chords, the same floor we sprawled upon, the same route we can no longer trace. This is my father, the same mother, the same eulogy, the same deflection. This is the quiet lunch with soup too hot, the same untrained eye, the same key. This, the skin before the touch from the tip of a tongue, and a breeze carrying last night's rain through the rising sun. In a stranger's music, I heard my own voice. In my voice, I heard my brother giving me the keys to his Camaro. In that night, on that twisty part of sunset, I heard my mother asking me to come home. In that home, I heard my father falling asleep on the couch. In his dream, I heard a girl's hair flutter in the breeze. In the breeze, I saw my sister. I saw my sister in the breeze. The words I wanted to hear were, your body is a haunted house. So I could close the windows, keep the winter from my dead. But all that is showing are bones that have frayed beyond explanation, wrapped in yellow skin burnt on alien landscapes. On the train, we wanted to be watched by the late night riders, but I fell asleep in the seat next to her. It was only for a few seconds. When I woke up, I wanted to tell her that I remembered now. She'd been reading a book. I was counting the flags that continued to flap. While we prayed, we had lost the sun. And this is from the end of the book. A couple of pieces from the end of the book. The language you began to utter in the womb to one day let you love and fear God, hidden in the falling of a petal, like your future now burning toward its end. This is the language you lose to speak words that you were never supposed to know, words that will go on to scar your tongue because your father believed in penance and he wanted you to be saved. You are now 46, and you are in ways still alive. But he hasn't read a single one of these sentences you've spoken, and it has been freedom to not be heard, and it has been a death in silence. What was supposed to happen when by chance you found the house that had haunted your life? The house yellow in a sun you couldn't name. Enter, take space, live, and allow yourself to make plans, or if you are meant to stand outside and watch it burn while you learn to pray in this forced language for the storm that will extinguish you. You are listening to the end of the new Frank Ocean album, and the music is what you always wished the end of your life to sound like. Not the words, because you've had too much of language that you don't belong to. Just the music for the final breaths, final pages, final turns around the moon, the sun, around the fire we built together on the beach, around the dead, or around our dead, around our taken, around the bones that shiver at the touch of lips on bare shoulders, around the final wanting, around our breaking, around our breaking, around our breaking. Daughter, I prayed instead when my body told me to run, because my legs were breaking and I was afraid of the pain. But I was wrong, and I lost you before the end of grace. I have replaced God with longing, and I am learning to speak to birds and the lavender to ask them to help me chart the stars. I started the story about the yellow house to tell you that there was a life I had wanted so badly. Then I thought, this is where I die, because that's what it means to want. I am told that there are other ways I can be a father. How do I tell them it was never about giving myself a name? I just wanted to speak yours. But what if I could be wrong one more time and the yellow house is not my broken body, not the hollow that holds me in burial? Daughter, what if my desire was always your way of guiding me to the place where you learn to cherish your life? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. When I first read The Yellow House, I thought very quickly about David Anton, the art critic and like long form poet. And I thought about like his 30-page poem, his 40-page poems that are these transcripts of his memory plus conversations that he recorded, or his own thoughts that he recorded. And I felt like reading The Yellow House, and in Anton's work, there are these explanatory kind of blocks, right? Like, this is where I am, this is who I'm talking to, this is what's happening. And then you get these, the symbolic flourishes, you get the richness, you get the surprise, and then he goes back into explaining and telling you his thoughts, right? Yeah. But all of The Yellow House is like David Anton when he's in his flourish. And it's not a 30 or 40, but it's like, what, it's like 80 pages, like 70 or 80 pages. And so I just thinking about the endurance that it takes to produce a work that's so intimate, and that it never wavers, right? The eye never wavers away in fear. And I think that's like the beauty of, and the fear of long form poetry, right? Like, people don't write long form poetry quite that often, or as often as I think they should, because of the fear of never having to look away from your own obsession, right? Like, sometimes you need a relief and you don't get it.
Yeah. I'm feeling exactly that right now as I'm working on my new book, because it's also, once again, like a long form. And that is the biggest challenge of like, depending on the day, I feel either completely stuck in it, like, what did I trap myself into? And then, or completely outside of it, like, how do I get back into it? Like, it's just like this weird, there are times where there doesn't seem to be any other options other than those two.
And it seems crazy when you have that moment that you realize that the poem is driving the car.
Yeah.
I think we have this perspective, we have this comforting myth as writers, right? And then I think most writers have this comforting myth sometimes that you're the one driving the car, and you're like driving through this landscape that you make. But oftentimes in any writing, but especially in poetry, it's like, oh, you're not driving, the poem is driving and decides where it ends, where it stops, and where it's taking you. And it's like going up a mountain of like hairpin turns. It's, you know, it's like, is a school bus going to come down? Like, are we gonna do? We're gonna be like a stalemate, like stuck on the mountain. But
Yeah.
it does bring me to one of my first questions about narrative. And I want to know what your beef with it is. Because even in reading the book, you chose from here and chose from there. It's the beauty of a long poem. You can kind of dip into the river and dip out. But even Abductions that came before Yellow House was not narrative. And I feel like the way you write your work is you have multiple levels of time, and the reader is standing on the top level looking down through several different clarities. And sometimes things way down low become brighter than even the time that's closer to them. Or I think about the experimental poem project, Ghostmaker, and I think about you producing those poems, destroying any evidence of them after you've read them, and then having the intention to collect people's commentaries or reactions to the poetry as a way to make a negative space, as I've heard you say before, of that project. Yeah. Or I even think of the kind of very, I don't want to say avant-garde or out of the norm. Maybe I'll just stick with those two words now, of your publishing practice, and bringing together like an activism-based group of people to practice something that's closer to the kind of publishing that you think is good, which is kind of really outside of the narrative, right? Like usually if you're a writer, you go work for the publishing house and then you're this editor and then that editor and you work your way up, et cetera, et cetera. So the questions are like, at every turn, you defy the idea of narrative and you lean into fragmentation and different ways of constructing your life with literature. What do you find problematic with narrative, and what has working outside of it taught you as a writer and as a person?
Well, it's interesting because like as you know, I love watching television and I love watching movies. So I'm not against narrative per se. I think what happened is, so it's sort of a multi-part answer, but a long time ago, I remember telling my teacher, hey, I actually sort of want to work with time. And he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I was like, I don't know either, but I just want to work with time. So I was like, what if, I just wanted to see if I could write a timeline that's flat and not linear. So it could sort of like, I could sort of weave in and out of timelines and past, present, future, and all this stuff. And it was just a few weeks, I just messed around. And like, I wrote pieces that aren't very good, but I think that practice sort of got stuck in my head. So since then, whenever, especially with working on longer pieces, like I'm writing and I'm like bouncing from just back and forth. And at some point I stopped differentiating where I was. So it like sort of like messes the timeline up. And I think that sort of broke my, I fixate on narrative in the sense I want to tell a story, but I broke the narrative by not fixating on the timeline. So it just became this weird kind of a thing. But with the Ghostmaker, what happened was I started thinking of my personal narrative becoming a weapon against me. And I started thinking of the book as a tool I leave behind for my enemies to use against me. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why I was like, I want to destroy this book. I don't want evidence of this book for someone to use against me in any way. And it's something that has, what I mean by that is like, whether they'll take what I wrote and use it against somebody else, like, hey, what do you mean we don't give opportunities to Asian American folks when Chiwan has a book out? You know what I mean? That shit is like the whole DEI perspective or whatever thing going on. Or constantly exploit us to exploit us and exploit our loss and pain and everything if we want a crumb from the system, right? It's like, tell us how devastated you are, how pained you are, and we'll give you a little money.
Mm-hmm.
So I really wanted to fight against that with Ghostmaker. And that seeped into our publishing practice. Like, so we ended up doing a lot of things that were focusing a lot on live gatherings of people. So we started using the book as like I, I used to always say that I want the book to be the evidence that a relationship between writer and reader occurred. It's like, this is where we all met. So with that in mind, we just started creating live gatherings, live events that would happen, disappear, but would live on in the memories of the people who were there. I don't know if that was the right thing to do, because it's like we are, starting to think about how important archiving and everything is, but that's sort of where my mindset was. And I think it has impacted the way I approach editing, I approach publishing, I approach writing and everything like that.
And I think like it's interesting that you say that you have that concern, right? Because it's a refrain throughout everything that I've gathered from spying on you through reading all of your interviews and watching all of your talks, is the concern that work by writers of color is being used to harm other writers of color, either through establishing the standard for reproducing violence in order to form a sense of identity, for majority white audiences to consume, or the financial transactions, or just saying, oh, well, this person writes this way, they're from your same group, why don't you write that same way?
Exactly.
And I wanted you to like speak more about that, because I think it's really important, and it's a dirty conversation, right? Like, people don't want to talk about it within, like, they don't want to talk about it publicly, but I want to talk about it publicly.
Yeah, and I tell this to people, that I've gotten the you don't write Asian enough from both the white structures, white systems, and also other Asian American systems. So it's like you're not following the steps that you're supposed to follow. Like, and it's a weird thing of like, if every publishing like scandal you've seen in the past few years, it's usually an editor or a publisher who's usually white or male being protected by the amount of money they've handed out, or the amount of publishing credit they've given to Black authors or other POC authors, right? It's like, I can't, what do you mean I'm harming people when I've done these things for these people? And so, and every time we chase that, it just keeps enforcing that, right? So it becomes this thing of, well, why, one of the reasons, for example, Judy and I moved out of New York, she was in the theater world there, is that she was so sick of the top-down approach, right? Of like, you're constantly have to climb the ladder. You start here, you go up, and we keep like replicating that structure in every field, in poetry and in literature, in arts, whatever. It's like, oh, if you know this person, they'll get you to this person, they'll get you this person, they'll get you this person. So it's like, then, and those structures are set. They're set. For you to get it to this step, you have to say, here, I was damaged this way by so-and-so. Oh, good, here's $5. The next step is, here, I was damaged so-and-so. by these people. Oh, here's $10. And you just have to keep like exploiting your own pain to climb up that ladder. Where people, it just becomes like some weird poetry version of torture porn almost, you know?
And then I also wanted to ask about like that hierarchy, thinking about how you have to reveal some kind of essential identitarian pain in order for you to like move up. And then how does it happen that those that move up and kind of ascend to the top end up becoming the gatekeepers that reproduce the hierarchy? Like what keeps, in your opinion, those writers, POC and Black, from getting to the top where they have that power and then just kicking the ladder over and just saying, these structures have harmed me, they've allowed me to reproduce harm, either via talking about how I have been harmed or experienced trauma in my work repetitively, and now it's time for us to try something different. What makes a person want to remain a gatekeeper?
I really don't know. I mean, like, I think, you know, it's this idea of scarcity that we've manufactured has just like embedded every decision we make. So it's like, even as you reach the top, you're like this fear of like, unless I kick this ladder down, I'm gonna lose it again. I'm gonna be sent down that ladder. So it becomes this endless cycle. I mean, we see it in politics. So I don't know why we're surprised when we see it in arts, right? It's like, oh, so an Asian guy might become a mayor of New York, but what does it matter if it's just like a same crummy human being, right? So it's like doing the same crummy thing. So yeah, we just, once it's like once we get in, we don't want to get out, right? Once we fall into the club, it's like, oh shit, I don't want to lose this spot.
Right.
So it's like, it's almost like maybe there's this sense of inherent sense that, oh, only one of us is allowed in this space, and therefore I don't want to lose my spot. If I let another person like me in, I might lose my spot. Maybe that's what's happening. But I think a lot about this idea of like scarcity that we have just like frightened everybody into, you know. And
that also makes me think of I don't know if the event still happens, but it's 90 by 90.
Yeah, we did it in 2014 and then again in 2017. We were thinking of doing it this year, actually, before pandemic. So it's like, oh well, we'll come back to that.
Right, but I remember it's like 90 events over 90 days, right?
Yeah.
And so it's 90 events over 90 days. You produced it in partnership with your wife, Judy. Hi, Judy. And you made a comment in another interview that you gave in 2017, where you say, if you're doing an event in LA, Los Angeles, and all of your participants are white, you were working really, really hard to make sure that those participants are white. And across 90 by 90, you said, well, like 95% of the people that we had were people of color, and it's because of the diversity of the city. And I thought this was fascinating because it immediately made me return my thought to publishing, and how even though publishers give the impression that they're really fighting for diversity, somehow a lot of what they tend to publish still seems to be really white. Or if it is diverse, then we have the same troped narratives over and over again. And the trope narratives are the lenses through which white audiences most popularly consume bodies of color. And so I wanted to hear you talk more about that too. Like, can you talk about that comment about working hard to maintain a certain kind of whiteness or white ideal of race through publishing? And where does Writ Large Press step in to diffuse that?
Yeah, so it's, I mean, if you lived in New York, like you've been to LA, I can go days without running into white people. Right? So like, it's one thing if you're your event is in, say, Brentwood or something, right? Or Beverly Hills or something. And then you go, okay, I see what's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's not that case, then what are you doing? Like, now I get that, the circles we live our lives in, might, like, somebody might live in a circle where it's like 90% white. Fine, I'm not judging you for that, but you can't just say, oh, well, that's just how it was, therefore that's just how I booked the event. It's like, if you are gonna put effort into finding a venue, you know, creating an event, promoting the event, are you really saying you can't make the effort to, like, contact 3 people like once a month? Really? So it becomes this thing of, and then there's the similar to that is like what I call, remember how years ago where the only Black actress that was in any movie was Angela Bassett? Like, no matter what, it was like, and then it was, and
then
it's
it was
like
Vivica A. Fox for a while on all the, like,
Vivica A. Fox.
yeah, Vivica A. Fox, and yes.
Yeah. It's like the same writer gets featured in like every event as like the Black writer or the Asian writer or the Latina writer, so it becomes this thing of, like, and it's strange that the actually Zoom events are kind of like making that even more apparent, because it's not even regional anymore. So you're seeing the same person in like 4 Zoom events a week.
Right, but across, like, nationally, right?
Yeah, nationally.
You can invite anyone from anywhere.
Yeah. So it becomes this thing of like, you know, read the room, and read the room is the city you're in, and the people. It's just like, do a little work, just a little bit of work.
Right, or even just being present with how you're looking. Like, I think that there's something that people think is very anti-scholarly or maybe anti-fair about just doing a Google search, right? Or like searching across different MFA programs for people that they haven't heard from, but they, but are producing work. Like, transparency is, in curating Lit Friday, I always have like an idea of like what's coming out, but when I need to like shake up what my ideas are, I understand it's like, oh, I'm reproducing something, repeating something. I literally go on Google and do like a wide search of every single book, right, that's coming out, that's on a list anywhere, and there's a great diversity of them because each like publishing place that's releasing these listicles are focusing on different people. And so then I'm able to say, oh, could you send me like a chapter or 2 of this so I can read the PDF? Oh, can I read this? Can I read that? And you find amazing work, right? No matter whether it's genre work or whether it's what people consider to be literary fiction. You just, when you do the research, you end up finding like gems in a sea of gems, right? And you're able to do something creative, like we have a sci-fi book coming up this summer and it's our first sci-fi book, and that's exciting. But it just seems like people, like you said, they put in the effort for the venue, they put in the effort for like the seating, the bookstore, but when it comes to actually choosing writers that show the diversity within a group, it seems to be a difficulty or a limitation, or there's an assumption that writers who come from one community don't have or cannot have a diversity of experience within.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it becomes like going back to 90 for 90. One event I think about often is that one of the events was an event where I wasn't allowed to attend because it was the people participating in it wanted it to be a safe space for Black, queer, and trans people. So they're like, you're not allowed here. I'm like, that's cool. let us set up all the things for you. You kind of went, well, do you want us to promote it? They were like, no, we'll promote it within our circles because we want it to be a safe space. It's like, great. So I went there like beforehand, made sure everything was set up, and then I bounced. Like, because, and it's like, I think what happens in publishing or events and stuff, or even like endowments and stuff, is each thing that they supposedly do for others is meant to put the light on them.
Right.
And
right.
So if the people are, as it is, majority like white and male and stuff, then all the things they do are meant to, once they go, look how great this white person is, or this system is, right? So it just keeps reflecting back. And so it becomes super self-serving in a lot of ways. And publishing especially, and indie publishing especially, is like really like right now poisoned by that mentality of like, we want to be it's almost like the publisher wants to be the star.
Right. Or it's even this thing where we are learning now that representation alone doesn't work, right? So having someone that through appearances, based on what they look like, may seem to represent a group, their values or their beliefs may actually be super harmful or super conservative, or even though they may be POC, appearing when you see them, they actually have like white supremacist values. And so there's this point at which, you know, or thinking about the publishers that you're talking about, there have been a lot of recent kind of Twitter, takedowns in regard to thinking about the lack of equity in payment in indie publishing, the presence of, continued, the continued necessity for the Me Too movement to keep appearing and showing up because of misogynoir in the workplace or sexual harassment in the workplace that, white women experience sometimes too. And so thinking about how all of these representations that we have don't really account for what someone's real politic or value system may be, right? And the representation kind of gets us, the representation without proof of behavior, right, or continuity and, like radical liberatory thinking ends up creating this like red herring where we're paying attention to what a person looks like or is being advertised to have done instead of what they're actually doing.
Yeah. So you have, I mean, I think I could say the specifics of this because whatever. But you have, in the past year, more than any time, we've been talking about like the off balance of the billionaire CEO and the labor, let's really support labor. We want minimum wage, we want this, boycott Walmart or boycott this because they treat their workers bad. And we in the publishing world and arts world are really down for that, unless, the biggest small press distribution, like multiple workers came out and wrote pieces saying they were abused by small press distribution, wage theft, harassment, all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And they stayed quiet. All the big small presses who, get distributed by them, like, stay quiet. Not only that, they started going after the workers for talking about this. So it's like, oh, wow, you care about labor unless it jeopardizes your profit margin is what you're saying. Mm-hmm. So how are we different than anything else? How are we different than Amazon or whatever it is? You just name it, right? Like, we will blast Molto Mario for stealing wages from his staff at the restaurants, but we're okay with this, right? So it's a fascinating thing of like, we seem to have given ourselves some sort of badge of benevolence just because we publish poetry or something. I don't understand what,
But also, we have a lot of like achy breaky heart poet conversations. And so one of the things that I always hear you say is just stop submitting. All the poets should just stop submitting. And it's not until now that I'm asking, what does not submitting to literary journals and small indie publishers or even large publishers achieve in changing the life of the writer and then changing publishing? What does not submitting do?
Oh, well, I'm thinking of it as almost like a general strike within the poetry world. Now, I get it. And I was being very specific about poetry just because that's sort of my world. And also you're battling over no money, right? So it's like, what if poets looked at ourselves as the labor, the editors are the management, and then the publishers are the corporations. Like, what if we should go on general strike until systems are changed? Stop charging us for submissions, charging like $25 for a prize that's like $200. How does that work out? Like, like it becomes a poet for a long time ago submitted a manuscript for a prize and he won. So the book was going to get published, and he
Congratulations, friend.
Yeah, and he got a couple of $100 for it, right? So he told his dad, like, "Hey, Dad, I won this prize, and his book's getting published." And the dad said to him, "Oh, you mean you submitted your book and they're publishing it?" Like, he's like, "What do you mean prize?" He's like, "So they say, we like your manuscript, here's money for it, and they're publishing it." Like, I don't know why that's a prize. That's part of the publishing process. But it's like this, by putting in prize, you've already turned it into scarcity, and then turned it into competition, and then turned it into money generating thing. By saying prize, but there's a $50 submission entry fee for the prize. And it's like, this is like every scam we've ever seen in whatever it is, spend $10 and you will enter 3 raffles for you. Like,
You're calling it a pyramid scheme.
It's a pyramid scheme, yeah. I mean, sure, today I'll call it pyramid scheme.
What will it be tomorrow, Chiwan?
I don't know.
So I also wanted to get into the idea about how publishers will shoehorn certain racialized narratives into the world and curate kind of like a repetition of a certain aesthetic based on the racial group that they're trying to represent with a certain quota they have, or with what they're publishing. And so when I think of examples, I think of course, like Black Pain, and think about how white consumers, readers, the majority, demographic, are often looking for those stories that often have to do with overcoming something, right? But not perhaps necessarily something that's like of a narrative of like interiority, right? Or everyone's always looking for the reproduction of certain infamous Black bodies that have been victimized from police brutality, and they're looking for the commercialization of I'm sorry, I'm like all the names just dropped into my head, and now I like they're looking for the commercialization of those individuals that have become, the faces of BLM, and they're looking for different kind of reproductions of that body. And then thinking about like what's Black enough, right? When it's on the page, what's Asian enough, and all of a sudden the communities aren't the ones that are necessarily establishing that baseline, right? In the writing, it's the publisher itself, which is, as we know, majority like white editors, owners, agents. And so how do the tropes hurt multiplicity? And what has been your experience with that?
Yeah, like as a publisher, I see this a lot where I'll look at manuscripts or poems where I go, I've seen this before. I've seen this before in every book that's come out in the past 5 years. every big books that came out, all the award-winning books that came out has this in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll ask the authors like, hey, I love this, but what was your thinking behind this specific thing and why you did it this way? What do you lose if you don't do it this way? And it's this thing of like, there's no answer, right? Because it becomes this thing of like, oh, I have to do that to be considered for that kind of honor. So it becomes this thing of like, I might have a lot of things to say in a lot of different ways I want to do it, but the industry is showing me that I need to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And follow that path. So it gets lost a lot. And if you don't, it's, you know, if you don't follow that path, it's just harder to get published. And it's no different than, you know, watching a movie where it's like, okay, now everybody's making like a, you know, horror movie where it's like, you know, found videotapes of someone who disappeared after going searching for a witch in the woods or something. So it becomes this thing of like, oh, other editors and other publishers just mimic. They're like, wow, that book won, that book that publisher published won a prize. I better find a book like that. And so they just find some version of that over and over again.
And then, I mean, I think that I've always found you to be ambivalent about your role as a publisher, right? You're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. You question the mechanism, but you know that if Writ Large Press wasn't present, then there's poetry that would take 10 more years to reach the light of day. And then there's some poetry that's also fantastic and amazing that would never see the light of day if Writ Large Press wasn't kind of doing the work as like a consortium of people who are interested in creating like variability. And so like in an ideal world, what would publishing look like? And what are the challenges of trying to model that as, you know, a part of like a press consortium?
Oh man. So, you know, I obviously have partners, Judy and Peter, who are Writ Large Press. And I don't speak for them. You know, we have our own ideas on things and we fight over it, over readings and stuff. But for me personally, the more and more I tell writers who show me manuscript, it doesn't benefit you for me to publish your book. Go and publish it on your own, and I will help you in promoting this book, booking events for you, as if you were an author that I published. But you don't need me telling you what should and shouldn't go into this book, and you don't need me taking a cut of your sales. So, but if you do it, if you ask me, hey, can you look over this? Does this poem fit? I will give you my opinion and tell you. Whatever you think you need from me, I will offer it to you. But you'd be better off publishing it on your own, and I'll be there to support. I rather work that way, even if it means I'm not specifically a publisher. I'd rather just help guide people into putting out their own book. It's 2021 in this crazy world. The fact that we still go through the process of approval from strangers who will then design this book the way they want, put out the book, take a cut of your money, and either not help you at all, which is another whole thing, conversation, right? We published your book and now we're not going to help you. So now you're stuck with the book that's not going to go out there.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get copies of the book. You can't do anything. So it's like, publish it yourself. Tell anybody who tells you self-publish is not a real thing, is not a real book, then tell them to, you know, take a long walk off a short pier, as I say. And I'll help you. I will be there for you as if you're my own author.
And so we've talked about money, right?
Yeah.
Already. And, you know, poetry and money have always had a very difficult relationship, right? Like, even when you think about the relationship between like Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot, like it was always T.S. Eliot going, I have doctor's bills and my wife is sick and I'm not making enough money off of poetry. We don't think about that, right, when we think of T.S. Eliot now, but Ezra Pound is like, you're not gonna make any money doing this, so I don't know why you're coming to me about your doctor's bills. I'm gonna edit The Wasteland, but you're not gonna make any money, you know, and having this historic conversation. And so, you know, you and I know that usually publishing a poetry book sets you up to make money in a different way, right?
Yeah.
Publishing a book sets you up to gig if you don't have a big box publisher, or if you have one, they don't want to do the work of promotion, or if you don't win some gigantic award with some $20,000 prize, you publish the book so you can gig around and get paid an honorarium. Or what you're doing is you're kind of like, I'm publishing this book because I have an MFA and I'm going to go teach at a small like college that has a poetry program, and the book sets me up to do that. And the lack of career options changes the opportunity. So are we just writing poetry? Are we just writing to pay rent now? Is that another part of the condition? Are we just writing for visibility?
Man, you know, every time I work with a writer as like a freelance editor and stuff, I go, when their book gets sold or they sign a contract, I tell them, stop worrying about the book. They can start thinking about what you're going to do with it next. Like if it's a novel, start trying to find a Hollywood agent who will option your book. Book's not even out yet. Don't worry about royalty and all that stuff. Just let that go. Just let it go. Move on. You know. But with poetry, yeah, like I know how important having a book credit is if you're trying to get tenured or trying to get a teaching position and things like that. So I get that. And I think that's as good a reason as any to publish someone's book, you know, like if it's someone you love and you love their work, and then it's like, if I just have one more book on my credit, I could get this tenure position. I'm like, I would really consider publishing it just for that. Like I would know exactly what it is for, right? Mm-hmm. And then poetry and money is such a great. Like, as you know, this new book I'm working on, I'm going to release it for free.
Right.
I'm not.
You already put all of your PDFs out on the PDFs of all of your books on Facebook.
Yeah, so you could download it for free. But this book, I'm not even going to worry about physical publication. I'm just going to publish it in all the digital format it needs to be, or audio format. I'm even going to upload like the Word document so people could just copy paste easier. Because a bunch of people have said, why are you doing this? Like, you know, don't you want it? We're worried for you and like not having money and stuff. You know what I mean? I'm like, you mean all the money I earned as a poet? You're worried I won't have all that money I earned as a poet? But there's all this sideways it could travel, right? Like that extends outside the physical book, whether it's, you know, being on something like this, talking to you, or like gigging around, or whether someone seeks you out because they're like, hey, I liked your book, can you help me edit this thing? And then, you know, whatever financial thing you work out. There's all these other things like that. Once you get away from the idea of like constant poetry foundation money, or, you know, royalty or things like that.
35 under 35.
35 under 35. Like when did that first start? In what field did that start?
I have no idea. None. But I do want to ask you another question though, before we go. Yeah. So you've been called one of our greatest living poets.
That was by Ed Lynn over barbecue.
And you've also been called the Jay-Z of poetry because you had this famous retirement where you were like, I'm not doing any readings, I'm not publishing anything else, I am out of here, right? And so I remember seeing the Facebook post, like it just flashed across my screen, where you were called the Jay-Z of poetry because of it. And I was like, what did Chiwan do now? And I went into the article. And And it made me think a lot about terms and the terms under which we decide to keep producing art, even though it seems like you're always chasing the dollar attached to like a fishing line down the street, right? Yeah. And so I wondered the terms that made you take a break, and how did your terms change? What are your terms for being a poet now? Would you even consider yourself a poet, as you, in your work, you're really concerned about, how do I get more people into this story? How do I get more people into this structure that I've created without alienating them with certain kind of very complicated forms? Or, you know, like, what is it? You really treat poetry like, you're like, how do I get more people to come to the barbecue? How do I get more people to come to the party? And how did this ideation, these thoughts, change your terms for continuing to be an artist? As we've discussed, it's difficult. It's not really that lucrative for most people. And it can be somewhat thankless at times.
Yeah, like, I think I stepped away because I felt I had exploited myself enough at that point. It was right after a reading. It was an intense reading. It was a good reading. A lot of people were there. And I just felt like I don't have anything more to just like scrape out of myself right now. And I felt gross about it. Like, I really felt gross. Like, what am I doing? Like, I felt like, I don't know. I felt like I was a circus. Like, it was like a weird feeling. But I think stepping away made me realize, you know, at some point you like forget, like when you and I hang out, like there's just pure joy, whether there's art involved with it or not. You know what I mean? And I think sometimes art took away from that because it became so insular, right? Like, this is all there is to it. So I needed to think about it, but it made me go back to something my old writing teacher once told me, because I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I haven't written in a while, and like blah, blah. And he was like, oh, you mean you were busy living your life? I was like, yeah, okay. So, you know, that kind of a thing. And when I came back to like doing readings and stuff, I mean, and I only started doing readings again because I had a chance to read with Doug Kearney. So I was like, I'm not turning down an opportunity to read with Doug.
No, we don't turn down readings like it's Kearney. We don't turn those down.
Yeah. So once I did that, I was like, I felt like I wasn't tethered to poetry. I felt like, oh, I feel like I'm finally choosing again. Like, I'm choosing to create. And if I'm choosing to create, I want to know what my reasons are. And it started just intent. Yeah, I think that's the word. Like, intent became more important, you know, than just constantly churn out work so I could get published, churn out work, published, churn out work, published. It was like, what is it that I want to do? What is it that I want my art to do now in this phase, and things like that.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being generous with me yet again and spending time with us on Lit Friday. I want to give a big thank you to the Greater Pittsburgh Festival of Books, and also just remind everybody watching to be back with us on May 28th for the reading with Joshua Aiken, Nicholas Goodley, and Malcolm Tarek. And also be back with us on June 25th to celebrate, you know, Lit Friday's birthday. It's been a year, and we're going to celebrate it with Ariana Brown, so we can do a pre-launch party for her forthcoming book, We Are Owed. And thank you so much, everybody. See you again really soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chiwan.
Bye.